Welcome to the Style Free Podcast, where a father and son detail and digress on the wide variety of topics within music, art, family, and culture. Your hosts are Professor Stephen J. Tyson Sr. and Jr., also known as Dad and Papo. Today's episode, we dive into a conversation about the evolution of rap flows, vocalese, jazz, synthesizers, autotune, and more.
We dive right into it so quick.
You know, the idea of language, spoken word, and rap, and how this has just been with us for forever. Mm-hmm. And in the 30s and 40s, there was a guy named Slim Gaillard and a guy named Slam Stewart, who was a bass player. And they had a group called Slim and Slam. And when Slam would play the bass, he would be playing a vocal unison. And I guess he was next to the bass so that the vibrations of his voice harmonized with the strings when he would be playing the bow. So it would go, you know, that kind of thing. And it was almost like a synthesizer, like a vocoder, but back in the 40s. And Slim Gaillard, who was a guitar player and a piano player, he was in night music with David Sanborn one time.
Oh wow!
Back in the 80s, right?
Mm-hmm. I remember that show.
He would make up words. Like there was a popular song that your grandparents used to enjoy. It was called the Flatfoot Floogie with the Floyd. Flatfoot Floogie with the Floyd. Flatfoot Floogie with the Floyd. It's a tongue twister.
Yeah.
For me anyway. And it was a popular song. And it's like, what's a Flatfoot Floogie with the Floyd? What? I mean, he would just come up with these things, like he would put, you know, Ute O'Rooney this and Slim O'Rooney. And, you know, he would add things. And it's just a way of using language. It was almost like it was built off of scatting. Or hearing foreign languages, GIs going over to France in the First World War and trying to speak French or something. And then they come back and say, well, you know, that's bougie or this. So it's interesting how language builds and where it comes from and how it gets into the lexicon and also into the cultural mainstream. And then that made me think also how that's built off of, in a certain sense, of scatting. Mm-hmm. When Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, and all these folks would be going, I think there was one instance where somebody forgot the words. I think that was a story about Louis Armstrong or something. He was singing, you know, I cover the waterfront. I forget what the name of the song might have been. Mm-hmm. Maybe he doesn't remember. He was like, I bazoo bazabuze, zazazaze. You know,
right.
So words, you know, like somebody heard the sound of the boom bop do bop da bebop. Mm-hmm. Oh, let's call that bebop.
Right.
It has a certain kind of rhythmic or percussive, you know, rhythm or something. So we've always found ways to ride along the rhythmic or sometimes the melodic, but the rhythm is the foundation, and then you have the melody on top. And how when the rhythm changes, you know, what precipitates the change in the rhythm? Mm-hmm. You know, what's going on in society and culture and so forth that changes it. Does it match? Is it selected? Does it manifest itself because it expresses the times? Mm-hmm. Or is it something that anticipates the times to come? Mm-hmm. It picks up on it's like listening to your ear is to a railroad track, and you can hear the vibrations of the train in the distance coming. And so it manifests itself that way. So as artists, as creatives, you know, that kind of goes into that whole story as to what extent we are antennas and then transmitters. Mm-hmm. So this is just part of that story I think that you were thinking about exploring, which is how has cadence, rhythm, manifests itself, you know, or I think you were saying drumline cadences with what was going on in the 80s or maybe even the early 90s in terms of a certain jazz aesthetic.
Yeah.
Maybe it's in time signatures. Maybe it's in, we know that Rakim talked about the saxophone and John Coltrane and, you know, how instrumental that was, no pun intended, in in his vocal delivery and his sense of time and where to land the beats and so forth, and how he even thinks about units of time in his flow.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right in there. So you're an authority to be able to talk about these kinds of things as well.
I mean, definitely not as much of an authority as Rakim, but it was reading his book that made me think about this topic, because he was talking about the influence of Charlie Parker and, you know, him also growing up and playing the saxophone and wanting to be a saxophonist at a certain point before he ended up getting into a budding young football career. When I was reading that, I was like, wow, it makes sense. Hearing his flow and hearing a lot of the flows that were used by various rappers, specifically in like the late 80s, like, you don't really start getting, at least in my perspective, you don't really start getting more of a diversity of flows until like the mid 80s, until the late 80s. Rakim and Big Daddy Kane and even KRS and Chuck D were rapping way differently than like Run DMC was in 85 or Sugar Hill Gang was in 79. They were a little more simplistic in their rhymes than it started to evolve into whenever you get to the mid to late 80s.
Yes.
And so it was like, so when I was thinking about that, I was then thinking about, I remember the first time I ever heard Migos, and it was probably like the summer of 2012 or maybe 2011. And I think it was the Versace remix that Drake got on. I immediately was like, you know, this flow is very, it felt like very staccato, but it immediately reminded me of the snare drummers on a drum line, because it has like a very, like, and also then thinking about Migos and a lot of other rappers from the South, like they're coming from Atlanta. They're coming, you know, from the homeland of drum lines and HBCUs. So that's so I remember when I was living in New York, you know, from 2007 to 2011, and there was this exodus of New Yorkers. Everybody was leaving New York and moving to Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And I was like, what's going on? Like, why is everybody moving to Atlanta? Most people were like, you know, the real estate is way cheaper and I can do a similar job that I have right now. So they just packed up and a lot of folks were just moving to Atlanta. But you also then get an increase in a surge of this energy where now in 2021, you have folks talking about how Atlanta is the Black center of the United States. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it was Harlem at one point. And it felt like in certain aspects and times it was maybe Chicago or Baltimore or LA, you know, it you know, here
Detroit,
and there. But
you know,
Detroit,
Chicago.
definitely. And but now it's without question Atlanta.
Yeah.
And it's just like, you know what, and even DC had its Chocolate City heyday, which, you know, gentrification and all that stuff has kind of deaded a lot of that. Philly is a very Black city, but and you see a lot of gentrification and pushing, you know, folks getting pushed out of West Philly, pushed out of North Philly, left and right, like even in the decade or so that I've been out here.
That reminds me of that film, that sequence in Boys in the Hood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When what's his name?
Lawrence Fishburne
starts breaking down.
Yep.
You know how it's done.
Yep. Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they were saying it all back then, and that's what's interesting too, is there's the gap in generation that happened after that. You had like Boys in the Hood, and you had this knowledge or this medicine that was getting put in the candy, so to speak. But then that kind of just fell by the wayside. It was just straight candy, and there's not a lot of information and knowledge that's getting carried in there. So getting back to like flows and like hip hop and everything, it's like, man, like here we are with this, everybody's doing this. Like I remember, I forget what year it was, but Snoop has his, or at least had his podcast, like GGTV, I think it was called. And one of the episodes, I think he's on there with 50 Cent, and he talks about the flow that everybody's using. And he's like, and he was like, everybody's using this flow. I could just take that flow and write whatever, and you know, and it'll be a hit, it'll be popular, it'll be whatever. And folks have done that, and it's still the hit flow. And so it's just interesting. Whenever I heard him doing that, it made me think of like, and I was like, wow, not only is that then drum lines, but then that's also military. And then it also has like the sound effect of a machine gun too. And so then you think about a lot of like the content that's in a lot of popular hip hop, you know, having that kind of flow will make a lot of sense in certain contexts. Or you have folks who've been in the middle, like a lot of rappers have been in the military, done ROTC, served some sort of time in a, service capacity in the military. Mm-hmm. And it makes sense as to also how then you could lock into a flow like that you're hearing, around the bass or around that kind of like cadence. And so like, I was just really thinking about like how we've evolved from that jazz style in the 80s and like late 80s to some extent the early 90s, and then trying to figure out what was going on in the 90s. In the 90s and the early 2000s, it felt very conversational. Hip hop was more of a conversation. Like you had Jay-Z, Nas, even like the Diggable Planets or,
Tribe Called Quest.
Tribe Called Quest. Like it was like folks are having a conversation with you, and a lot of times over jazz beats.
Yeah,
and so it's just,
right. Like, so you have, what's his name? The Abstract.
Q-Tip. Yeah.
Q-Tip, right? Yeah. And you say, and I would go down, and then Fife or somebody would come
chimes in.
Right. Back and forth,
Yep.
But that was sort of like trading the way that jazz musicians, at a certain part of a song, they start going, and the guy would answer,
That call and response.
It's that communication. Yeah.
So it's interesting. Like, we go from this jazz flow to a jazz action of like call and response and conversation, with the voice as the instrument. I'm trying to then figure out at what point it got more into like the drumline piece. I know we definitely had this dance phase with Soulja Boy and D4L and all these like songs that were starting to come from the South that were then giving us dances. And so that made lyricists like Nas make albums called like Hip Hop Is Dead, where it was just what's going on with the lyricism, what's going on with our message and our purpose if all we're doing is just dancing and snapping our fingers and stuff. But then you also had lyricists coming out of the South like Lil Wayne and T.I. and Young Jeezy. Now he's just Jeezy. But yeah, you had all these lyricists coming into play too. And so it was like it then started to make the lyrics and what you're having to say almost as important as the beat and the energy around it. And so then I started thinking about, well, if you have young kids who are influenced by the music that's going on down South, but yet you have some of these folks starting to also weave in the lyricism, and then you have kids coming up and be like, well, how do I express my lyricism? Like, what do I know? Then it's like, well, what I know is, my drum line, or what I know is what I'm doing in band at school, or, out on the field with the marching band, or, like whatever, or an ROTC or whatever it is, and start patterning lyrics into those cadences and those rhythms that they're more familiar to. And then that evolves as, folks grow older and then become groups like the Migos or whoever it is. And everybody's now then using that kind of flow, is at least my thought around that kind of progress.
And plus, when you have films like Drumline and that kind of thing, that gets out into the larger market. So people are kind of primed, for that. When you talked about the drum lines and all that stuff, I was thinking about a guy who was in a, I don't know if it's a bugle corps, or he was in a drum band, marching band type situation. That was Maurice White.
Oh, yeah.
So I wonder, and he was a drummer too. So I'm wondering, I'm thinking, I know that rhythm and the beat and everything was always important to him, but I'm also thinking about, okay, specifically, how might that have influenced his vocal flow and cadence? That's something to look into.
I think it definitely influenced how he played the kalimba, because there's a lot of like polyrhythms and syncopation that he does within the kalimba. It's pretty slick.
Oh, is that right? You pick that up?
I mean, just in listening to it, like I'm thinking about certain interludes that Earth, Wind & Fire has, and it's just like, I'm curious as to if he's just doing it all in one shot or if he's layered certain kalimba sounds, because the way in which it weaves in with one another is pretty cool.
Well, the fact that you can play different notes simultaneously, in that way. I think I've seen him do it in one thing on stage, live on stage. But you're right, there may be some overdubbing or something like that in some cases. There's a song that they did called, not to get too off the track, but Kalimba Tree. It was originally an interlude with the album they did which had
Raise.
Let's Groove. Yeah, Raise. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they had an extended track called Kalimba Tree, but I used to play that all the time, because I
that's probably the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, because I always loved their interludes, and I wish they went on longer. But anyway, but this idea though about flow. So, you guys got guys over here, at the Three Deuces, right?
Yeah.
Three Deuces. And that, which is where your grandfather, went after he came out of the army.
Mm-hmm.
And you go down the steps and guys are playing. The bandstand is real small. They got the bar there and the whole thing. You can see Charlie Parker, Miles Davis, and this is who Grandpa saw. This is who your grandfather saw. He saw this lineup over here. You see
Max Roach, Miles Davis, somebody Jordan.
Oh, that's Duke Jordan.
Uh-huh.
He was a piano player. And Tommy Potter is the last name on there. You can't really see it so much, and he was the bass cat. And so I guess what I'm saying also is that when you would hear Charlie Parker and he would go, he could play a melody a certain kind of way, and then he would go da 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 da. He would break up the phrase into something else, into these micro units, and always land or delay or go over where he's supposed to land to the other side, and then end where you don't think it's supposed to end, but it's always right where it's supposed to be. It always lands just right.
Yeah.
And that kind of intellectual creativity, that heart is something that I find also in some forms of rap, where you don't accept something just as it is, but you say, how can I take this and use this as a vehicle to express, something else? Just the way the bebop guys would take some popular tune and they would take the basic chord structures of that original song, and then they put their own melody or come at it from a different angle. So this part of your ear, if you're in you're familiar with popular culture, you're like, yeah, I can connect with chord structure. That's familiar to me. My ear is attuned to that, but now I'm giving you some more. I'm giving you some other kind of information.
Yeah.
I'm using this platform to say what I need to say. Part of it is a commentary on the music. Part of it is a commentary on the culture. Part of it is is me expressing what I need to say. This is my platform. It's that kind of liberation, that kind of stand that was so important and so empowering to many people, whether they chose to be jazz musicians or not. It was just another platform. Some other people were doing it in other arenas. But music is so amazing because it gets projected on the radio. It goes over the airwaves. It goes past barriers. It's like those kids in the South or in the growing suburbs or in the Midwest somewhere. And I'm talking about mostly white kids. Rock and roll. They're like, now they know that their parents are not, they have some certain political or social restrictions, but there's something about that beat, that rhythm, that energy, and it captures their imagination, and they start listening to the lyrics. Your neighborhood might be segregated, but the airwaves weren't segregated.
Right.
It traveled over. If you had a receiver, you could listen. Some of those kids would put would hide under the bed or under their pillow, or they would, and listen to this, whoever, the Five Royals, the Dominoes, the Sonny Till and the Orioles. Then later on, Elvis and, all these other, Little Richard, it's like, what? Yeah. So that's the power of music and the technology and being able to use it, in order to advance the culture.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, thinking about the people taking the pattern and the rhythm and the flow that's really popular right now, like the folks who are considered like some of the best to do it or the best rappers alive right now are the ones who've been able to take that flow, but use it to still convey their message their way, as opposed to doing that flow and then just making whatever throwaway song that you could make with it. So like Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, Big Sean, folks like that are using, this more modern kind of triplet flow or military or drum cadence kind of flow and incorporating it as needed, but are doing it in a more unique way.
How are you responding to that with your own music? And
I mean, so with my album Intellectual Property, like part of that was intentional to make songs that either the beat felt old school, but yet the flow or the content was relevant to right now, or the flow felt a bit old school and it was intentional in that regard too. So like a song like Degrees, where it's definitely more contemporary and the flow is that triplet or that cadence that we were just speaking of. It definitely exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep, way different than, my song Old School or my song What's Up, that are definitely more intentional in having that old school kind of flow. Just because, I was, born in 85. I've raised on all these artists that helped to change hip hop's flow and lyricism forever. And so to not, that's never going to not be in me because, that's just the era I grew up in and the folks that I grew up on. But to not also acknowledge that while also like carrying it forward,
it's like tipping your hat and acknowledging those who laid the foundation, but still going, still moving forward. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
You're carrying it with you forward. You're carrying that aspect of the culture. You're holding it up in a way and saying, I acknowledge you. When you hear somebody, and let's go back to jazz again, you hear somebody like Charlie Parker, or you hear Miles Davis, or you hear Sonny Rollins, or they are carrying the people that they listen to. Miles Davis might have been Freddie Webster, Fats Navarro, some of his contemporaries, Dizzy Gillespie, of course, Clark Terry. He that's embodied in what he's doing, right? Sonny Rollins, listening to Coleman Hawkins, the Hawk. That was the cat. Ben Webster, all these guys, Lester Young. And I would say even Lester Young with Miles to some extent, they're paying attention and they're saying, I respect you. I connect with what you're doing. Okay, now I'm gonna fold that into my flow and keep moving. Yeah. So you're in that sense, even though it's different genres per se, the principle of carrying the culture forward, is still there, and not by closing the door on the past. Like Miles would say, I never look at the past. I don't pay attention to. But he knew where he came from, and you can't build anything off of nothing,
right?
So people say that, but the point is that whether you acknowledge it or not, you're building off of something that your antecedents or what came before. And that's how we, and I think it's important to know that. I think it's important to know the names, because then it gets people out of the sense that, they're inventing the wheel,
right?
Or that it's all about me. No, you're one part of a bigger picture.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that, as I get older, I'm even more cognizant of the fact that your time here is a certain shelf life, as it were, And so what is the quality of the time? What are the things that are important that you want to, what's your legacy, going to be? And how can you take from the past, learn from the past, not be bound by the past, but take the best of it and carry it forward, whole Sankofa concept.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So you mentioned a couple of things there. I was thinking of Gangstar. These are the words that I manifest.
Yeah.
Which is built off of Night in Tunisia. Very good. Yeah. All right. Those car rides. And then you have talk about like vocal flow and cadence. So Charlie Parker, right? There was a style of music that developed called vocalese. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
No, vocalese now.
Yeah, vocalese. Eddie Jefferson, King Pleasure, Lambert Hendricks and Ross, with John Hendricks, who was affiliated with Dizzy. So they would take a song by Charlie Parker in his melody line, and then they would put words to it.
Oh, wow.
Or vocalese, right? So a song could be, you've heard the song because it was famous. You were very young, but Frankie Crocker used to have it on WBLS, and he would always play King Pleasure's version of Moody's Mood for Love.
Yeah, There I Go, that one.
There I go.
Uh-huh.
So that whole vocalese style, such a funny thing on every time I near you, I never can hear.
So that song originally didn't have words?
I think it was built off of a song, off of a melody line of jazz music. I know they did that with some other songs that Charlie Parker did. Bum, 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 ba, ba, da, ba, ba, bum, ba, da. And I can't remember the names of the song right now. I'm sort of having a little brain fog last couple of days. But anyway, but that's something, you can look that up. But the point is that that's another way in.
Yeah.
It wasn't scatting. It wasn't, scooter ba dee ba da ba da da.
Yeah. That really reminds me of, so I just heard this song a few weeks ago. It's by this rapper named Marlon Craft, and he has this song called Road Trippin'. And the way that he raps in a certain section of the song is so slick because he ends up following the kick in the song. It's like dun 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 dun, and so he just makes words that fit, and it's really dope. I could probably play it for you real quick too. Yeah. But Marlon Craft, Road Trippin' is a good example of I guess a modern example of the vocalese.
Vocalese?
Yeah. That you're talking about.
Yeah. No, that's cool. When he was doing that, by the way, his flow, reminded me a bit like a instrumentalist, a jazz instrumentalist or something. When he said dun dun dun, I was thinking, don't push me, cause I'm
yeah.
I'm dying, not you, not here.
Wow, that's real, yeah.
Grandmaster Flash, right? And Melly Mel. Yeah. So I think this idea has been, it's there. It's away for a while. Some people come back with it. We were talking before about Bone Thugs and Harmony, and this idea that rapid style of cadence, that Eminem picked up on later on, and that became part of it. But then the other guy, Shinehead.
Right.
Yeah. There was a time, Tongue Twister.
Who changed his name to Twister, and then everybody knows who he is.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's incredible. I was actually listening to the DJ Khaled has the Welcome to My Hood remix.
DJ Khaled.
DJ Khaled. Well, no, the echo was DJ Clue.
Oh, Clue. You're right. That's right.
DJ Khaled just scream all over it at the beginning. But yeah, it's like, there's a lot of people on that song, but there's a lot of fast rappers on it, like Busta Rhymes, Twista, even T-Pain. T-Pain is an underrated rapper, singer, lyricist. Like T-Pain is somebody who can not only rap fast, but also give you a melody with it, and the lyrics will also make you laugh at the same time. T-Pain is very, very underrated.
T-Pain. All right.
Yeah, because people usually just think of him as like, oh, he just puts auto-tune on his voice and he can't really sing, or that's not the case. And that's not the case at all.
Well, that's interesting. Auto-tune. Yeah, that's a whole other thing.
It kind of took the vocoder and put people in key.
Yeah.
So like if you couldn't sing in key, or if you couldn't play the keyboard with the vocoder in key, or even know how to play keyboards, then you weren't able to do it. And then people ended up taking, once they learned about auto-tune and that software, ended up using that and being able to manipulate that in ways that have changed, modern music in its own way.
That's where, but then going back, taking that connection with the vocoder, you could bring that back to, not just Roger Troutman and Zapp and which was Computer Love and all those kind of tunes, But then you go back to Herbie, the Sunlight album, for example, right? Then you go back a little bit further. 1972 release, Stevie Wonder with the song "Girl Blue." Have you heard the song "Girl Blue"?
Yeah, I love that song. I could play that in here too. Yeah,
I mean, that change, using electronically changing, it kind of reminds me. I was talking before about Slam Stewart, and the way that he used the bass. You hear that in Dizzy Gillespie, had some of that too. You can't also leave out the guys who produced it, Robert Margouleff and Malcolm Cecil, with the Tonto system, that integration of different synthesizers and computers. Once they connected with Stevie, it was full on. I mean, he was just finding ways, to do that in the 3 classic, quote unquote, Stevie albums. There was sort of I have the album that came out before this one. Came out in, I believe, 71. It was called Where I'm Coming From. And it's there where he's starting to begin experimenting with some funky electronic kind of stuff. But it really comes full force in Music on My Mind.
Yeah.
And then Talking Book from Big Brother and all the other songs on there. And then of course, Inner Visions. Which is Golden Lady, and it just goes on. I mean, those are considered the classic Stevie. Of course, songs in the Key of Life.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't. I mean, come on.
Magnum opus.
Yeah, I mean, man. But that foundation was set. Now, by that, but he was no longer working with Malcolm Cecil and Robert Margouleff. Now they went on to work with, not to get too far off track here, but they went on to work with the Isley Brothers.
Oh, wow.
Listen to 3+3. Listen to some of the other albums that I think it was Up to Harvest for the World. Listen to the use of the synthesizers, in their albums. Fight the Power, right? The Heat Is On. That's the name of the album, but there's a song by that name as well. And I have to tell you, Ernie Isley, in my opinion, is so underrated, underappreciated as a guitarist. I mean, it's almost criminal that this guy hasn't gotten the recognition and the acknowledgement and the flowers, for what he's done. And he's still alive. And Ronald Isley turns 80 this year.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? Quincy Jones just turned 88.
Wow.
I'm telling you, man, the train is moving, bro.
It really
the train is definitely moving.
And it's crazy too. Like, I remember as a kid, like thinking about like myself doing music and the people I'd want to collaborate with one day. Most of the folks I wanted to collaborate with as a kid are dead.
Well, you can always be on a remix or something.
Right.
In fact, I was thinking about, like that song that Natalie Cole did. Unforgettable.
Oh, with their dad, yeah.
Yeah. Where they got to harmonize and they got to, sing together.
And Drake did a song with Michael Jackson a couple years ago.
Oh, is that right?
They basically just took Michael's vocals from the Paul Anka sessions.
I never heard about that though.
Yeah.
The Paul Anka sessions?
Yeah, so like Michael Jackson and Paul Anka did a few sessions in the mid 80s. That's where the song This Is It. Here I stand. That came from the Paul Anka sessions. And so did Love Never Felt So Good.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That's what you think about, songs that have never seen the light of day, that are in the vault. Yeah. But, Michael was also somebody who paid attention to rhythm.
Very much so.
Rhythm king.
Yeah.
And so his vocals, that's another thing. It also reminds me that when you talk about rhythm and beat and all of that, there was also an influence. And this is one of the things that I remember listening to a jazz musician theorize. It might have been Max Roach. I'm not sure. But he said that he felt that tap dancing had a very profound influence on bebop. On the rhythms and beat.
Yeah.
And when I think about that, I thought about that when I was thinking about some of the drumline music.
Yeah. There's definitely a derivation that can come from like tap dancing or hoofing, as they called it.
Yes.
And then also thinking about whenever you're talking about rock and roll music and Bo Diddley, how I was reading Paul Mooney's memoir.
Really?
Black is the New White. It's fantastic. I would definitely pick this up. It's incredible. And he talks about how growing up he used to do ham bone all the time.
Yes.
And he was saying, he was like, ham bone was everywhere, ham bone, this and the other. He's like, and then Bo Diddley did ham bone and everybody called it rock and roll.
That's right. Hey, Bo Diddley. Yeah. Bo Diddley, which is ham bone, where you been? Round the world and on again. And then, all this kind of.
Yeah, Pat and Juba, all of that stuff.
There it is.
Everything is just the derivation of it all boils down to Africa and the diaspora. So, I would definitely check out Paul Mooney's memoir.
Okay. I made a note of that.
Yeah, it's called Black is the New White.
Okay.
So, awesome. Thanks, Dad.
Welcome. Thank you, Pop.